Going. Carrie, you ready?
All set, ready to go.
I'm gaveling this meeting of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and also the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm joined here by my colleagues Ed Flynn Councilor Ed Flynn of District 2, Councilor Michael Flaherty at large, Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, District 5, Councilor Julia Mejia at large, Councilor Kim Janey, District 7 and Council President, and Councilor Anissa Sabi-George at large. Thank you all for joining. This working session is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Channel 1964. This year's council budget review process is comprised of a combination of public hearings and councilor working sessions. And these working sessions themselves don't have a public comment period, but we strongly encourage residents to take a moment to engage in the process by providing testimony for the record. So there's a bunch of ways you can do that. You can attend one of our virtual hearings and give public testimony there. So we're having 27 hearings over 6 weeks. You can go onto the public notice for any of those and access the Zoom link and join us in the Zoom and then testify via Zoom at the end of the hearing. If you don't want to have to wait for the end of the hearing, you can record a 2-minute video of yourself and share it through a forum on our website at boston.gov/council-FY21 budget. You can also provide written testimony that way or by emailing it to ccc.wm@boston.gov. And we'll also be having 2 dedicated public testimony hearings after we've heard from all the departments in their hearings. So those will be on May 26th at 6 p.m., focused on the BPS budget, and May 28th at 6 p.m., focused on the rest of the city budget. You can also informally tweet us your questions at #BOSBudget, BossBudget. So we really hope you'll join in. And this working session is focused on docket 0588 to 0590, orders for the FY21 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits, docket 0591 to 0592, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations, and docket 0593 to 0596, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Those docket numbers I just read are the full set of dockets for the city budget. But what today's working session is actually focused on is the Boston Public Schools, and specifically their commitment 1 in their new strategic plan, which is to eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps. So the new superintendent, Brendan Cassellius, has a new strategic plan. It's got 6 commitments, and our hearings with the school department over the next month will be sort of structured by that plan, but also by the things that the council takes a particular interest in, and that have, really significant budgetary implications. So our first set of BPS hearings coming up after the introductory ones that we had a couple weeks ago will be in the thing. I think this is on, I should know the date, but May 5th maybe. It'll be commitment 1 focused on sort of the overall alignment with that goal of eliminating opportunity and achievement gaps. And then in the afternoon, we'll actually be having a hearing with BPS that's specifically focused around 3 topics that the council really takes an interest in, which are our inclusion policy in BPS, our special education and special education transitions, and then our English language learning and bilingual education plan. So in the morning, the focus will be opportunity achievement gap policy alignment in general, implementation, progress, workforce diversity, curriculum bias review, code of conduct implementation, disproportionality, social emotional learning and wellness, nurses, trauma and crisis response, behavioral and mental health supports, and HERN, which is HERN, which has to do with supporting our homeless students in BPS. So this is really the working session for the council to talk about what are the key questions that we want to be asking about this set of topics, both that overarching set and then the specific inclusion, special education, and bilingual education trio. And the idea is for us out of this working session to get a set of questions that we can send over to the administration to help structure our conversation at those hearings. So that is the plan ahead. I am gonna jump right in to asking my colleagues to share their questions. As in our last working session, these are all going to be documented by our council staff, and they'll get formally sent over to the administration. It'll be a little bit different because our last one with capital, a bunch of our questions got deferred to the departments, but this obviously, these are our questions for BPS about the topic they're coming to speak to us on. So we're expecting them to be responded to in this pair of hearings coming up. So with that explanation underway, I thought I'm going to defer my own questions just because I know there are time pressures for some other colleagues, and jump in order of arrival, which means starting with Councilor Ed Flynn. Councilor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Buck. So starting off, Councilor Buck, could I ask that the administration talk about how they're working closely with the Boston Teachers Union to implement changes and to work with BTU to have another successful year in educating our children? That's one issue I would like to learn more about. The other issue I was focused on is what is the interaction we're also having, that Boston Public School is having with families, and how can we get families, especially families that may not may not speak English, how are we communicating that message to families to get them more involved, knowing that we have language access challenges? I also would like to know, when we're hiring nurses and we're hiring mental health counselors, are we also factoring in the demographics of the school in terms of, you know, the language many of the students are speaking? For example, at Josiah Quincy School, do we have social workers? Do we have nurses that also can communicate in Cantonese so that they're able to communicate with the students, but especially with their families as well? And I also would like to ask the administration, what are we doing for our students that are living in public housing, making sure that they also have a successful career in school and that they get the needed services and programs? Food access is a challenge. Recreation programs can be challenging also in public housing developments. So we want to make sure that that experience for people living in public housing is the same experience as students that are living in wealthier neighborhoods as well. And my final one, I don't want to take up all the conversation, but my final one is, what role is the colleges, universities, and hospitals playing in our schools? What formal role are they playing in our schools in terms of, you know, not only educating our children, that's certainly the job of the teacher, Boston teachers, but what services are they providing, including medical care, including access to dental assistance? Tufts University dental program in Chinatown has a very good program with Josiah Quincy School, where they go in and they give the students a cleaning and an examination. But are we able to expand that type of program to other schools as well? I would like to see our colleges, universities have a specific role that they're providing, everything written down on services that they're providing to our schools, in making sure that they're doing their part as well. I will leave it at that, Madam Chair. And again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I also want to say thank you to Central staff for their excellent work as well.
Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. And I should say that just after I listed all the names, Councillor Matt O'Malley from District 6 also joined us. Next up will be Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, to be followed by Councillor Julia Mejia, and then Council President Kim Janey. Councillor Flaherty?
Yeah, good morning, Madam Chair. Would like to kind of do a little deeper dive on the last several years. I've been asking that all of our Boston Public School students get their eyes tested, sort of at critical phases during their sort of academic career. I'm of the opinion that we have a lot of kids in need of corrective lenses, and kids that cannot see the chalkboard, et cetera, and really don't know the difference. And so having that testing done sort of the minute that we get these kids in the system, and then sort of track them along the way I think would be tremendously beneficial. And so the name of the program, so BPS entered into a partnership with Warby Parker, and they started to do some eye exams. But as you recall from the last hearing, they kind of, and again, superintendent just kind of getting up to speed and learning about sort of the different programs and nuances, if you will, of the job. But she really didn't have a lot of detail with respect to the Warby Parker program. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about that pilot program, specifically the number of students that have participated in the program to date and what the results of that are. Again, a strong proponent of getting kids as soon as we can. So obviously more sort of K0 programs, but we ought to be pumping the brakes in the first and second grade if kids aren't grasping, whether it's the alphabet or simple arithmetics, and that's the stuff that I think we need to be cognizant of. And as we sort of see kids progress through their academic career with BPS, we ought to be offering eye testing, free eye exams as a portion of sort of what we do here. So you see the significant number of kids every year get sort of lumped in and requiring additional assistance and what have you. And I'm curious to see what percentage of those kids would be on the right trajectory if they could just see, and if they could see the chalkboard. And I think this is a big part of it. So so that would be great if we could get a little more information on that. And then with respect to the achievement gap, our kids lose a lot of time. They lose a lot of before and after school programming time with lengthy transportation rides. So I'd be curious to see what, if any, statistics they have with respect to kids who attend school closer to their home, and whether or not that pays dividends academically for them. And again, schools that close to their home, which is where their support system is, where parents and grandparents and after school programs. And a lot of times I hear from parents that their children don't get home till later, and by the time they get down to the ball field, game is half over, or they've missed a big significant portion of a recital or a rehearsal. So streamlining that so that we're doing the best we can to allow children to go to school closer to their home. Clearly, quality, we need to make sure that we have good quality schools in all of our neighborhoods. It just goes without saying, but I'm just curious to see whether or not if they have any statistics with respect to kids that attend school closer to their home. Do they thrive better? Do they perform academically? Do they perform better academically because the support system in their respective communities, the before and after school programs, the Boys and Girls Clubs, the community centers, the after school help, the libraries, the health centers, all of it. So, a lot of our success stories in our city are community-based success stories, but when it comes to educating our children, we tend to kind of abandon that model, and I'd like to try to get back to that. If you think about the role that our community centers, our community libraries, our community health centers play in all of our neighborhoods. Our schools should be playing the same role. And I know they do for some, but not for all. And we'll have an opportunity to make sure that we have all of our schools performing on all cylinders and being top-notch in quality, so that this becomes a moot point. But I want to see whether or not they do have any statistics to that effect. And I think that's one of the ways we can get to closing that achievement gap. So, and I look forward to other questions from colleagues in another round, but those are sort of some of the things that I'll be looking for from the superintendent and her team.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. Next up is Councillor Mejia, to be followed by Councillor Janey, and then Councillor Asafi-George. Councillor Mejia?
Yes, sorry, I just logged in. I've been having some technical difficulties, so
You want me to skip you and circle back? Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
That's no problem. All right, Council President Janey, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Just following up, I guess, on questions from Councilor Flaherty around the achievement gap. Clearly, remote learning is going to take its toll on our students, on our staff. I worry that our starting point was a persistent gap, and just wondering what the overall investment in the BPS budget around eliminating the opportunity achievement gap, specifically around implementation of the plan that is on the books that was adopted by the school committee back in 2016 and developed by the task force. Specifically, I'm wondering about staffing for that office. So this is the OAG office, and whether or not we see a change in staffing. I'm wondering about any of the initiatives that the office was hoping to undertake that required resources, whether or not those are going to be impacted now because of COVID, what those investments were. I am interested in understanding what the plans are for summer learning opportunities, and perhaps there'll be another hearing on that, but I want to just get that on the record. I mean, I think this is something that we have to pay attention to on any year, but especially now with months and months and months of remote learning. I think having a good, robust plan with some investment there is going to be really important, and definitely connected to the opportunity and achievement gap. In terms of the code of conduct, I'm wondering where things are in that policy and whether or not we need new investment there. Trauma, I continue to worry about our response to trauma, as a district and as schools, and I know our schools are doing the best that we can, but I wonder about a system that would alert schools, and I think this is more of a technology piece, when there are children coming up who live in a neighborhood where they experienced gun violence. And so, often our trauma response teams are on the scene, they canvass the street, and the broader neighborhood. And sometimes if an incident happened in a particular household, that family is getting some services and some support, but perhaps others aren't. And I just want to make sure that the dozens of students that are showing up to school after such incident are also getting supported. So wondering about the investment there. And all of this, these are kind of staffing questions. I think it's important to understand what the staff implications are in our budget for these various departments and initiatives. Wondering again about supports for homeless students, our students who are in recovery, all of our students who would be vulnerable, including students who are in special education, particularly those who are in sub-separate, wondering about the staffing allocation around inclusion and whether or not we're getting closer to having 3 teachers in every classroom and not just one teacher who is dual or triple certified. And so really interested in understanding how many of our classrooms actually have that model that I think we all point to when we think about the glory days of the O'Hearn School. I also want to understand where we are in terms of ELL and expansion of dual language. So just ELL services, how many students, and with the ELL and SPED questions, particularly as it relates to remote learning and COVID, wanting to understand how moving forward in FY21, we are getting services to our young people, whether it's through the summer learning opportunities or hopefully when we're back in the fall, or if we're not back in the fall, how we are getting services to ELL students and our students with disabilities. I'm a big proponent of dual language expansion. And let me put my Zoom back up just in case the chair was lifting her gavel. I didn't have the video up, so I apologize if I am going over. I'm just trying to look at my notes here.
Got another minute.
Oh, great. Another thing, so when we do go back, and hopefully we will be able to bring children and staff back together in buildings, you know, in my mind, there's not going back to some normal. And so, you know, our classrooms, you know, many would say they're overcrowded already. How do we account for social distancing? Because even when we go back, it's clear to me that we'll have to put certain precautions in place. I'm wondering about testing for students and staff, you know, COVID testing, temperature checks, things like that. Are we thinking about that? And if we are, obviously that's a resource that we have to think about for when children and staff safely return to buildings. And so, you know, hopefully it will be this fall. You know, obviously we have no idea. We have to get through the current crisis, but I just want us to be thinking about that and planning for that and what that looks like in terms of social distancing, in terms of any testing medical testing that we may have to do around COVID. So I just wanted to get those kinds of questions on the table as well. I think I may be out of time. So I think that's it for me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Council President. Next up, Councillor Asabi George, and then it'll be Councillor Ricardo Arroyo, and then Councillor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you, Chair Bach. And I'm going to keep my questions for this particular hearing that we're preparing for, specific to those subjects, because my understanding is this afternoon there's a part 2 on some of those other topics. So, you know, for me, my questions are really around some of the work that I've been up to over the last few years, an update on nurses and the being able to right-size our nursing staff to a minimum of a full-time nurse in every school building, where we are. I had asked that question in the overview hearing, and we had some information shared. My hope is to go deeper into the weeds on that and to understand how many schools are left remaining, and then making sure that even though we have a full-time nurse now, supposedly in every school building, how do we make sure that there's appropriate staffing? So some schools we know need 1.5 nurses or 2.5 nurses, for example. And then how does that relate to the school-based mental health and emotional health support services? We know that some of this additional investment that we're putting into the district will go to social workers in our schools. So I really want to understand those numbers. Again, when we're striving and correlating it to the nurse conversation, a full-time nurse in every building, I believe that we should also have a full-time emotional support service professional in every building. What does that look like for our school district? And what does that mean around an investment? Also on the nurses, the DESI report says, and I'm quoting, a district administrator said that funds to pay for the nurse and social worker would come out of the district budget, and that the district had asked every department and school to identify potential reductions of 5% to help pay for them. So I'm curious, is that true? Did we ask schools and departments to have a reduction of 5%? And how does that how does that impact making sure that we have essential services in all of our schools, and how do we ensure that any reduction isn't taking from those essential services? And it goes back to the deeper question that I had asked, and I think the overview, one of the two overview hearings around that foundation budget, like what is a baseline budget? What is it? What are the things that we've identified as a city and as a school district that we want to have as a minimum in each one of our schools? So that's on that piece. I also have some questions around, because I think HERN and the Homeless Education Network will be in this part one. What is the support services that are underway, both the family-led stability pilot that I'm a part of in a number of schools? How are we now seeing that play out in other schools? Do we have 100% identification of family liaisons in all of our schools that work specifically with families experiencing homelessness? And what's sort of the meat of their work? What's the substance of their work? So is it referrals for housing? Is it referrals for access to food? Is it referral to other services? So I'm curious as to some of that work. And then the HERN money that I had advocated for in my second budget season that follows kids to each of our schools across the district. How are we using that money? I think that they're allocating it as part of the student weight and formula, so it's no longer standalone funds, but I'm curious about how that money has been used and where we've seen some success, stories, and where we've learned and seen some changes. Also, a little bit to Councilor Janey's point around trauma and crisis response, in particular trauma and crisis response to our BPS kids who are experiencing additional trauma because of the COVID-19, because of the impacts of isolation, because of the impacts of a lack of food security and uncertainty about the future. So I'm curious as to how we'll enhance services that will be provided to students in our schools come September and in the new fiscal year, but really thinking about the summer, what's happening around that trauma response and connecting kids to services throughout the summer. I was on a call last week with BPS that included the work of BAM becoming a man, and I believe that we're looking to expand BAM throughout the school districts. I'm just curious throughout the high schools. I'm curious where we are on that. And then also talking about, working on woman. So it's sort of the sister program to BAM. How are we doing with investing in that programming and supporting our young women? I think that I'm probably hitting my time, and I'll save these for round two, but in case we don't get there, I am very curious about the comprehensive behavioral health model, so accessing mental health services for all of our kids. And I would love an update on the CLSP, the cultural and linguistic sustaining practices, so that as a policy in the district. And that it covers, it also applies to special ed and exam schools as well as workforce diversity. But I'll get to those questions in the next round. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Sabi George. And I will just clarify, so we're having two hearings, right? The morning and the afternoon one that I described, but we are actually doing questions for both of them at this working session. So what if you want to, on the next
great. So I will have questions for round two.
Yeah, I suspected that on those topics you might. So yeah, we have these, throughout the budget season, we have these days where we have double BPS hearings, but we're doing one working session for each day, not one working session for each hearing, just to try to, consolidate things a little bit. So we are also doing questions for the inclusion, special education, and bilingual ed one right
Excellent.
now. Thank you so much. All right, next up is Councillor Ricardo Arroyo. Then it'll be Councillor Matt O'Malley, and then Councillor Julia Mejia.
Thank you, Chair. And so if any of these questions have already been asked, I have to step away to take a constituent call. If any of these questions have been asked, just put a check mark next to it on whatever notes you have, as two people asked. My first question, which I heard a little bit from President Janey, but is there any summer programming that is planned for summer fiscal year 21 that is taken into account in the budget that would be affected by COVID? Question two, why is there a 35% decrease in student support services in the Office of Student Support? Question three, why is the achievement gap portion of the BPS budget under the Chief of Equity and Strategy being cut by 48%? And with those kinds of cuts, how are they planning on meeting the OAG goals and strategies. Why is the bilingual education Spanish program being reduced by 77%? Why are sheltered English immersion programs for Cape Verdean Chinese and ESL being cut by 12, 23, and 28% respectively? Question, I think I'm at 4, I don't remember anymore. Why is there a decrease in the amount spent for socio-emotional learning in the program detail of the budget? Which might be related to the increases they're making in other places, but just what those cuts are. Then the decrease in advanced word classes, I believe it's 10%. What's the reasoning and basis for that? And then this one's important for me. Which other schools, other than the transformation schools, will be getting designated social workers? And then are they planning on implementing dual language programs at any schools in District 5? I think Madahunt is scheduled for one, but I just want to confirm that and know if there's any others. And for my first round, I think that's it. That might be it all the way through, because other people are asking similar questions that I would ask. So that is it for me. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully that wasn't too fast.
No, that was great. Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. All right, next up, Councillor Matt O'Malley, and then Councillor Julia Mejia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning or good early afternoon, colleagues. Similarly, there's been a lot of good questions and sort of a good frame of the discussion. We particularly want to thank Councillor Sabi George for her unique vantage point in this space and the great work she's done. So I'll tick through my questions as well. We touched upon this early on, and it's been sort of like a drum that we all beat at every transportation meeting, but I want to really drill down in the out-of-district placement, which should always be a last resort, and including the transportation costs that associate with that. It can often work out to $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 per pupil because we've got one student, going to a school that could be 30, 40 miles away daily. Secondly, as it relates to the work on nurses, I also want to talk about the social and emotional support, specifically the increase in school social workers, which is something I know this body has really worked on for a number of years, and we're seeing the fruit of our labor in this year's budget. And that's something that we really should celebrate, and it's a great thing, but I want to hear about what the placement of these social workers has been, where we're looking specifically for some of our high schools as well. As it relates to preparation for the new school year, I think this will probably drive most of our conversation and most of our uncertainty going forward, but I want to hear what preparation for September looks like in terms of class size, in terms of staggered start times, including potentially utilizing modular classrooms or perhaps even shuttered buildings in certain campuses to help create some. I think the superintendent correctly said on one of our calls that you can't have social distancing in a school, but certainly there can be, or there ought to be some accommodations made. I want to have a conversation specifically as it relates to the exam school initiative, which is something that we've fought for and we've increased funding for so that more and more students can go, particularly students of color. We've seen great success in that program. Population double, in some cases perhaps even triple over the last couple of summers. Obviously, it's unlikely that it will be administered this summer, although perhaps it will. But I think maybe there's an opportunity to allow for the exam school initiative to be done remotely, and we could then allow for more students to be accommodated to take that. So that could be something that's actually a bit of a silver lining. And I also want to have a specific question on the non-exam high schools, particularly what we're doing to address the opportunity and achievement gap, how we're really drilling down and focusing on STEM and STEAM curriculum and what needs to be done. And then finally, I'm a big proponent of the inclusion school model, the Manning School and Jamaica Plain I often point to with great pride. That's something that I know works and works well for all kids across the board, whether they have some particular needs that need to be addressed or more general population, and that's something that we need to be increasing. So I want to hear about specific plans to increase that. And then finally, and we touched upon this as well, in sort of operations of BPS, we've very pointedly and intentionally worked to decrease the number of school configurations. As we know, there was something like 20 or 24 different configurations several years ago. We want more K-5 models, or K-6 models, I should say, or 7 to 12 models. So where we are in that, what the time frame is like, and has this new reality that we're in, to use a trite phrase, hindered some of those planning steps going forward. So thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you specifically, Shane and Michelle, for doing the great work and transcribing our questions for central staff.
Thank you so much, Councillor Malian. Yes, I echo those thanks to central staff as we rattle things off here. Councillor Julia Mejia, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. Kenzie, can you hear me?
Yes.
So a lot of the questions that Ricardo has already brought up are things that I was, going to be asking, but so I'll second and third and fourth all those things. So just put a little asterisk next to those. So I do have a few specific things that I'd like to just raise up. One is one of the identified goals for OAG policy was that by June 2018, they were going to have a solidified strategy platform to address issues of racism and equity that aligns with the work of BPS and City Hall. And allegedly it was going to be through strong parent and community ties. On the current goal tracker, it says that it's past due. And I'm just curious what funding in the current recommended budget, if any, is going to go to address this issue of parent voice and the issues of racism and equity. I'd like to bring that to the table, as well as of the 13 goals listed by AOG was around workforce development and diversity. 6 of them are past due, including staff diversity, to develop and implement a process to collect both quantitative and qualitative data to better understand why educators of color stay in certain schools or leave. This goal was supposed to be met by September 2017. The status of this project says that, and what is the status of this project, and what is the plan to fully implement it? The same goal stated OHC tried to collect data in the past and is currently re-strategizing the best way to implement this process. We expect to embed this process by the end of SY 2019. What is the status of this process? Just curious where things stand with that. How many supervisors of attendance are there in BPS is a question that we have too. In regards to social and emotional learning, we're seeing a decrease in funding by 123%, but social emotional intervention is seeing an increase in funding by 33%. I'm curious if they can explain the difference in goals between these two programs, and what is the reason for the former being halved and the latter being tripled in funding. That just needs some clarity around that. Under program funding, summer review program is seeing an 8% decrease in funding, with all 4 FTP positions being eliminated. Especially now with the impact of COVID-19, the need for review programs, specifically during the summer, seems like it's crucial, and not only for continuing education, but for preventing youth violence. What is the reasoning for this cut? Just curious as to why they're cutting it. Okay. So I'm going back to my little document too that I'm curious around. Here, just give me 1 minute. So right now, I'm talking specifically around the nurses. BPS is currently working to ensure that there's 1 nurse in every school. What is the plan to make sure that these nurses are culturally competent and reflective of the communities that they serve in terms of hiring practice? In regards to trauma and crisis response, I'm curious, how are the departments across BPS currently handling the mental trauma associated with COVID, social isolation, and how will future spending be allocated to address these needs? This is very specific to what Councillor Sabi George has already lifted up, but I just wanted to reiterate that that's something that I'm really curious about as well. In regards to inclusion, what is the goal of having a general education teacher and a special education teacher? Are there general education teachers not certified for special education? What percentage of teachers in BPS have special education certification? How large are the classes for inclusion? What percentage or increase / decrease is this over time? In regards to ELL and bilingual education, one of the things that we have seen, well, I have seen this and heard a lot of, is from parents around COVID-19 and English language learners, especially where parents don't speak English. Simply put, a lot of ELL students are not learning as the same capacity as they would if they were in school. How does this budget set aside funds to essentially pick up the slack that COVID-19 has created? I'm also curious around, according to BPS, all funds, program details, there seems to be the 7% decrease in bilingual and SEI, which is what Arroyo pointed to, but I'm also curious that there has been a 23% decrease for SEI Chinese education, a 28% decrease in SEI overall, and I'm just wondering where they're gonna fill the gaps for that, and if they can explain the difference, how they're gonna make up for that, that would be great. And I know that Councilor Jamie had already addressed some of the issues around the workforce diversity, but I'm just really curious about what's the plan for recruitment and retention around that. And I believe that we have covered all of it for now. You can rock that gavel.
Great, thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. We've been joined by Councilor Breeden. So, Councilor Breeden, if you're prepared with questions now about these opportunity and achievement gap hearings, both the general one and the inclusion special education bilingual one, I can go to you now, or you can wait till the second round, whatever you prefer.
I'm sorry for joining the meeting late. I will wait to the second round. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, then I'll just raise a few of my questions. Like many others, many of mine have been addressed by other folks. I think I just overall really want to understand what our plan for standing up a more robust bilingual education program district-wide is. I mean, it's now been 3 years since the state really gave us back the authorization to do that in a serious way. And I think that in addition to Councilor Arroyo's question about sort of dual language rolling out at specific schools, I just really want to understand what our overall strategy on that is, because I think it's so important affirming the value of a diversity of languages in addition to English, and also, really important for our students' competency in this world. So that's definitely something I'd like them to do a real substantial dive on, and it's a good reason for it to be one of the focus areas of that second hearing. There's a couple of things that are mentioned in their materials that I'm just interested in knowing more about the lessons learned from. So it looked like they did some sort of qualitative conversations about why teachers and administrators of color leave the system, and would love to better understand the reasoning related to that. And also, I think OEL did a inventory of models, curriculum, and materials used by the existing dual language schools, and would love to understand kind of what we gleaned from that. Especially as I mentioned, we sort of go into thinking about a bigger, broader strategy. Definitely want to talk about inclusion. I think a colleague already brought it up, but I know we've got situations. I have a teacher who lives in my district who, her students are in inclusion classrooms that have a paraprofessional with them for their regular subjects, but then when they come to science, it's just one teacher because she's also got the special education certification. And I think that issue, I know of a number of cases where that sort of doubling up of certifications happens in a way that just doesn't seem consistent with a robust inclusion model. So just to echo Councilor O'Malley and others, and Councilor Asabi George, would love to really dig into that and how we move towards, I mean, maybe we have a few different models of inclusion, but it just seems like it doesn't really seem like we're operating consistently on like a kind of model basis in the district on that front. So those are, and then I brought it up in the school funding hearing, but I think just understanding better how, like, to what extent we make sure that our funding correlates and tracks the kinds of things that we're measuring with Opportunity Index in terms of the kind of the, you know, way in which poverty determines our student outcomes. Because I think that, you know, I see a school like the Tobin in my district that has a really high proportion of homeless students. And I just feel like doesn't end up actually getting that much money per student. And I think the Opportunity Index piece is kind of an additional little add-on we've made to the weighted student formula, but I'm not sure we're going far enough on that front yet. So would like to, in fact, I'm pretty sure we're not. So would like to think about, it seems like the district's been on a path for a few years of assigning some more money according to that Opportunity Index, and we'd like to understand about that, and also the HERN dollars that Councillor Sabi George referenced, how we're really moving towards those things being a more substantial piece of the extra resources that we provide to our schools. And then I'll just echo everyone on, it just seems to me like COVID-19 learning loss is just going to compound to the nth degree the inequities in outcomes that our kids are seeing. And so it just feels like we need a kind of moonshot approach to this. And I mean, the one silver lining to me would be if being in a literal emergency helped us treat, you know, students who are getting left behind as well, just in general, as more of an emergency, and trying to think about, is there a way to just respond with a huge amount of academic and social support in this crisis that's different and new for our kids? So that's obviously a big picture question. And I will note that we do have like the sort of plans for the summer, et cetera, specifically tagged for a later hearing, partly because we expect to know a bit more about the summer by the later part of May. But I still think that it's reasonable for us as counselors to raise these opportunity gap related questions around learning loss at this hearing, because as Council President Janey said, it's also connected. So those are my questions. And now we'll go back up to the top. So feel free to pass if you got all yours out in the first round, but anybody who wants to bring up more things that have come to mind. I'll start with Councilor Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. I'm going to hold off. I'm going to hold off on this round, or could I come back, Councilor Bach? I just have something I need to do right now, if that's okay.
Yeah, if you come back and we're still running, yep, happy to take you then. All right.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty.
And thank you, Madam Chair. Just would like to get an assessment from the school department with respect to requests that principals have in that are unmet. I know that, you know, one of the things that I think that seems to work, particularly in schools that are performing well, is the school site autonomy. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we need to make sure that, you know, our resources are getting to the classroom, to the core of teaching and learning. And I know through school site autonomy, we've seen some great dividends. And at the same time, I know that, you know, when we talk to teachers and we talk to principals, there are a lot of things that they still don't have request upon request. And in many instances, many of our teachers and principals are bringing things in themselves. And so, again, we're in sort of a new day and age in terms of with COVID-19 response, kids in teaching and learning supposedly taking place at home. Not quite sure what type of quality control and assurances we have that is actually happening. But moving forward, it would be nice to see whether or not our you know, our frontline teaching personnel have the resources that they need to do what they do best, which is educate our children. So so that would be something that I would be looking for from the school department. You know, and again, each school setting is different, and Teachers may teach differently, but the mere basics in order for us to, again, provide a good quality academic opportunity to make sure that we're doing the best we can to close the achievement gap and make sure that we're putting our kids in the best possible position to not only thrive at the Boston Public Schools, but to be able to compete, whether it's to compete for an exam school or it's to compete to go on to one of some of the best colleges and universities that call Boston their home. An absolute travesty that we boast of having the best colleges and universities in the world, yet not enough of our students, not enough of our Boston Public School kids get to go to these schools. They live next door to them. They can see them up the street from their house. They drive by them. At times they get to use the fields and the facilities at these schools, but most kids have no shot at getting in, and we need to turn the tide on that. And that starts with making sure that the resources that we appropriate every single year, the Boston Public School budget continues to grow significantly every single year, yet we're educating less kids every single year. And I had a front row seat because I'm the longest serving counselor, so I can go through all the budgets that we went through. At the end of the day, our best foot forward is making sure that those resources, those very precious resources now, make it to the classroom so that we're giving our kids the best quality opportunity that exists, and that happens when we listen to teachers and we listen to principals. We find out what they have and what they don't have and what they need, and we make sure that we get them those critical resources. Very much like we're responding to this COVID-19 response, we're finding out what communities need, and whether it's on food insecurity, whether it's on housing, whether it's on healthcare, and we're responding in kind, and we're making sure that we're getting those resources to the people that need them the most. We need to do the same with respect to this budget. We get lots of talk about different things that happen within the school community, but at the end of the day, for me, it's the middle meets the road in the classroom, and if resources aren't getting to the classroom, we're doing everyone a huge disservice. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. And now Council President Kim Janey. Councillor Janey, you there? All right, I'm going to skip her for now, and Councillor Anissa Sabi-George.
Thank you again, Chair. So just to continue on my questions from the first round, I had teased the Comprehensive Behavioral Health Model Initiative, and I am curious where we are with that work, sort of the goals and the initiatives around that, and what our focus is when it comes to that. There was also a drop in the appropriation from FY20 to FY21. So I'm curious as to why there was a decrease and what those efforts will include in the new school year. I talked a little bit before some of our opportunity and achievement gap work, the culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. Where are we? Are we looking towards full implementation? Around special education, the Opportunity and Achievement Gap Task Force was working to really analyze and understand the, I think, overassignment of Black and Latino boys to special ed classrooms, special ed substantially separate classrooms, and the really, I think, over assignment of those boys to those classrooms. So just sort of curious where we are to that and looking at that assignment practice around the, and similarly around the exam school effort through that task force. There was a look to really analyze and work very specifically to increase the percentage of Black and Latino students entering the exam schools. Workforce diversity, I think Councilor Janey touched on it, and I know it's really important to her, but we're talking about the diversity of our teaching staff and our administrative staff, especially in our schools. And the race piece is terribly important. But I also am very interested in gender as a mother of 4 boys, and talking too about boys in substantially separate special ed classrooms, the role that male teachers in particular play for our male students, I think shouldn't be understated. Around inclusion, again, a lot of colleagues have touched on this, but I am really curious around the definition of inclusion. I don't think we've had one as a district, and we need to get to a place where we can identify what an inclusion classroom is. What does it mean? to be an inclusion classroom, and what's the analysis around inclusion across the district? I think that there is sometimes seen an oversaturation of inclusion classrooms, and it really affects enrollment at schools because of that. And what is, when we analyze that, the number of inclusion classrooms, there seems to be a disconnect between what the BTU thinks we have for inclusion classrooms and what the district thinks we have for our inclusion classrooms. And then also related to special ed, the role of teaching students who have been diagnosed with dyslexia. How are we supporting those students? Because I've heard from a number of residents and parents across the district that we don't have the services necessary to support students with a wide range of needs, especially as it relates to a dyslexia diagnosis. And then last year, or maybe 2 years ago now, I held a hearing on special ed, in particular to the IEP and the 504 process. I am curious about the number of students that we currently have on IEPs and 504s, how we're evaluating and reevaluating those students, and how we're incorporating family and or student, especially older students, in that process, and where we are with those reevaluation hearings and meetings based on the timeline. My son, who's on a 504, we just recently had his annual meeting virtually, and I hope that all families are able to access those meetings, and if they aren't, how are we sort of mitigating the STRIVE program, which works with students in the special ed department who are aging out. It's a really wonderful program that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years. I'd like to know how many students are currently in that program, what support services are in place, especially right now, and how do we really beef up the opportunity for those students to participate fully in their academic experience. I do have some more questions around supporting SLIFE students and our work around the Look Act, but I'll come back for a third round. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Isabi George. Next up, we've got Councillor Ricardo Arroyo. Councillor Arroyo, are you there? All right, I'm going to jump to Councillor O'Malley. Any further questions? Seeing none, we will jump to Councillor Julia Mejia, who I see is up and ready to go.
Yes, thank you. So I guess I am going to, I'm not going to look at my little notes. I'm just going to give it to you the way I know how. So I do have some questions. I would love to know, we talk a lot about parent engagement and community engagement, just curious about how we're going to allocate resources so that we are ensuring that parents are well versed on the budget, that school site council meetings are happening in multiple languages, and that parents are getting the information that they need in ways that they can understand it. Curious when it comes to family and community engagement, what type of resources are going to be allocated to increase parent council participation, especially if we're going to be losing family liaisons during this process. I see that during the transformation schools, they're going to have access to more supports, but I still am worried about those schools that are not falling under that portfolio. Just making sure that those all schools are going to be supported around family and community engagement. I'm also curious around special education. There are a lot of students who are sitting in rooms right now when school is in session, but those services are not being rendered. What accountability? How are we keeping track of students and the resources that are supposed to follow that child? And I just see a disconnect there. I'm really curious about what support systems are being put in place. And the last question that I have And I'm not sure, Kenzie, where this falls. If anything, you can just pump my brakes. But I'm very curious about looking at the curriculum design. You know, a lot of the lessons that our kids are learning are not culturally reflected of the true history. And is there any money put aside in the budget to do a deeper dive into the curriculum to ensure that it reflects accurate history? Because we do know that Columbus did not discover America. We were already here. And I think that when you look at diversity and you look at a sense of self, it would be great for BPS to also allocate some resources to ensure that our classes are reflective of our true history. And I hear that from a lot of parents. And I think it's worth me uplifting here in this space. And then the last piece of it is everybody talks about equity and how important it is. I am really looking to BPS to put some financial resources in helping parents understand what equity is and what it's supposed to look like. So it's not just passing down information, but that parents are having a real understanding of how their schools are resourced or not. I think there's some communication gaps there. And I'm wondering what BPS is going to do to educate parents. And I do agree with a lot of the things that some of my colleagues have talked about, quality instruction. You know, we talk about the exam schools. I've always said that I think exam schools are great. I'm concerned about the schools that are not usually the ones that most kids want to pick, like Madison Park, Excel. I'm just wondering what BPS is going to do to ensure that our high schools are well resourced, so that parents have a nice buffet of options. So it's not just the coveted exam schools, because not everyone's going to get into those. So what do we do for kids? You know, what BPS is doing to allocate resources to ensure that those schools are also getting what they need. And looking at the pathway to exam schools, K through 8, those feeder schools, I'm curious what financial resources are being poured into the feeder schools in certain neighborhoods, so that we have a better sense of what BPS is doing to support the academic needs of schools that have fallen short. That's a lot of questions. Take what you want.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Yeah, we'll see whether BPS thinks on the curriculum question. We will have a whole set of hearings that are focused on academics, and so it might make sense to put those there. But we'll see if they want to address it in this set. And then, yeah. But thank you for all those great questions. I see that Councilor Flynn is back. So Councilor Flynn, if you'd like to go ahead, and then it'll be Councilor Breeden.
Thank you, Councilor Bork. Wanted to follow up on my previous comments, but I would also, I'm a strong supporter of the junior ROTC program that we have in many high schools. It's an excellent program. It's about as diverse as you possibly can get. But for some reason, it almost seems like the JROTC program is one of the first programs to be cut. This is a program, it's not a military recruiting program. This is a program that helps students develop leadership skills, accountability, citizenship skills, working together, understanding the diversity of various backgrounds, in working hard, in working as a team. Again, I see the junior ROTC students often, and they're a great credit to the city. And I just want to make sure that we continue those programs across the district. They are excellent. The sports programs, the athletic programs in our BPS, I want to know about the funding, what's being cut and why. What support are we given to students, not just on sports teams, but also physical fitness as well? Gym classes are a critical part to developing strong bodies and strong minds as well. One of the issues I focus probably the most on it as it relates to the schools is nurses, making sure we have a nurse in every school. I want to continue working on that, but I would like to get an update on exactly how many nurses we have. Are they in every school? Do we have more than one nurse in every school? And if we don't have less than one nurse in every school, what are we going to do about that? And the other is, if a nurse is absent, I know there's a pool of nurses as well, but if a nurse is absent during the day and the pool covers the nurse into that other school, is that other nurse also fluent in various languages that might be needed to go to a particular school? Are they fluent in Spanish? Are they fluent in Cantonese? Or are they there just covering? So those are important issues I'd like to focus on. In mental health counseling, how many mental health counselors do we have in every school? Are they able also to communicate in many languages? Are they partnered up with community health centers? What type of services, mental health services, are they giving to the student and the interaction they're having with families as well? Again, thank you, Councillor Bach, and I appreciate all your hard work on the subject.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. And I just want to correct myself, Councillor Mejia, we did list curriculum bias review as one of the things for this first hearing, so I think it'll be a good conversation for this upcoming hearing, since you raised that. Now I'll turn the floor over to Councillor Liz Breeden.
Thank you. I learned so much by listening to our questions and back and forth. Some issues of concern to me, the early education, I'd be curious to know the number of students that are doing at early learning centres, how many early learning centres we have, and the number of students that are actually enrolled in those. And are we evaluating outcomes in terms of readiness skills and not just academics in those settings? Readiness skills, be able to participate in classroom activities and all the self-care activities and skills that young students are expected to have before they go into kindergarten. I had a question about the Madison Park Vocational Technical High School. Where are we in terms of the recovery of that high school to get it back on track? I feel that so many of our young students, young men in particular, having a vocational technical opportunity is very, very important, because not all folks want to take the academic track and go on to a four-year college necessarily. But going to Madison Park shouldn't preclude them from doing that if that's the decision that they want to take further down the line, to go take up engineering or go on to four-year college to go further in that field. I also feel that I'd like to know more about vocational pathway in the comprehensive high schools. If a student is not going to a vocational technical high school such as Madison Park, are there career pathways within the other comprehensive high schools? I'd like to know more about the status of music and arts programs in our schools across the board, because it's well documented that participation in music programs increases academic performance in other areas of studies. So I'd like to know the extent of our music and arts programs and how effective they're working at the moment. The other issue I really feel with families with English language learners, in some of we have a hub school in our neighbourhood that offers adult education for parents, to English language ESL classes for parents. And I think that is a win-win for all round. You increase parent participation, you develop a community, and you also, your parents are better equipped to be good advocates and to participate in their kids' education down the line. So I'd like to know more about funding and programs for adult education. And then back to our present situation with the COVID, we've moved very quickly to a distance learning approach, remote learning at home. I really feel that generally across the city, there's gaps in our infrastructure, distance learning infrastructure. So not everyone has access to reliable internet access, etc. So I feel that distance learning components should be part of the menu, especially for our older students, perhaps, who are working, actually employed, and they're trying to graduate high school. That we need to think about distance learning as not something that we do when there's a crisis like COVID, but it should be part of the menu for our students all the time anyway. And then that brings us round to the whole issue of technical readiness in terms of parents supporting their children using distance learning for homework, etc., for use at home. So that's basically my menu of concerns with regard to this budget. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Breeden. And there's a couple of those things like vocational education that we may hit in the next round of hearings. I think we've got that on the list for the 19th. So again, if it makes sense to defer that question, we will, but we'll get it recorded from this hearing, from this working session. All right, I don't have any further questions right now. So I'm gonna go back up to the top. Councillor Flynn just went. Councillor Flynn, are you all set? All right, Councillor Flaherty. Oh, Councillor Flynn is up.
So sorry about that, Councilor Buck.
Just checking if you have any third round questions or if you're all set.
No, I don't have any further questions. Thank you, Councilor Buck.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Councillor Flaherty?
Yes, Madam Chair, I do follow up. I have a follow-up question, if that's okay with you.
Yep, absolutely.
And I was just taking some notes from the last round of questioning. One of the issues I wanted to see whether or not it makes some sense to ask BPS. And these are questions we've been getting from some parents and some of the community-based partners as to can BPS talk more about their work to date with getting the partner BPS program up and running? And I think that's sort of based on the fact that what's going on right now, obviously, with respect to community-based nonprofits are now going to have fewer resources given what we're experiencing, particularly around the opportunity portfolio. So I'd be curious to see what BPS's commitment, particularly their financial commitment, will be to supporting the community-based nonprofits that we need, obviously, as part of the partner BPS program.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. I think, next up, sorry, I lost my run order. Council President Janey, do you have any further questions? I think now I'll recognize Councillor Anissa Sabi-George.
Thank you again. Let me just go back to my notes. Sorry about that. So where I left off last round was around the Look Act in particular, and just sort of curious about how the Look Act is being implemented or as a part of the strategic plan going forward to expand our bilingual. Say again? I'm sorry. So the Look Act and how that will be used to implement and expand bilingual and multilingual programs, including dual language. I know that's an interest of Councilor Arroyo's, and in particular how the Look Act will be sort of utilized to make sure that happened. And the other piece was on SLIFE. So I'm really interested in how we as a district are supporting SLIFE students. We had a significant population my years teaching at East Boston High School, and just really important that we're able to support those students and make sure that we're doing all we can. So I'm curious about how many students are in the district that are considered SLIFE, and how we can speak specifically to the additional investment of $1.8 million to support those students. And then I think that actually covers most of my questions. I do, Councilor Janey, I believe, brought up Recovery High School. I received a text just during this working session here to make sure that we are continuing to support programs like Ostagai High in particular that work with our students who are in recovery. So just want to double down on that. And Councilor O'Malley, I know, talked a lot about the out-of-district placements and that investment that we're making as a district in out-of-district placement. And I believe he asked in an earlier hearing around the district's work to look at the more popular programs that our students are accessing, whether it's vocational or special education outside of the district, and how we can perhaps look to create those programs in our own district if our students are accessing them outside the district. That's it for me. Thank you very much, Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor. Councillor Matt O'Malley, any further questions? All right. Seeing none, I will go to Councillor Julie Mejia.
Thank you. So Kenzie, unrelated to the questions that we have for BPS, this is scheduled from now until 2 o'clock. I just want to make sure that I'm utilizing my time wisely in terms of what the expectation is, because I feel, do we just keep going asking third questions? Because
this is the third round, and I think I'm pretty much expecting that I'm going to give Councillor Breeden a chance next, and then we'll be done with this. So we block out the time in the working sessions to make sure that, you know, depending on how many questions councilors have, we're not cutting people off. Tomorrow we're covering a whole bunch of departments, for example. But yeah, I would expect, I'm trying to make time for everybody's questions, but I would expect we'll be wrapping up shortly. So
okay. And I just wanted to make sure that I'm like, wait, I keep like, you know, but it's on my calendar. So I guess something that I'm curious about is it's COVID-19 related, and in terms of assessment, like what's their plan financially, because it's about budget, but how are they going to make up for that gap in learning? Just really curious about how they're going to identify those gaps. Where are the resources? You know, which buckets are they going to be pulling out of to support those gaps? Because some of those gaps will be academic. Some of those issues on the surface will be social, emotional, and mental well-being. So I'm just curious about kind of how are they going to fill in those gaps. And I know Councilor Flaherty talks about the 13th year of school, where kids get an extra year. I'm just curious, given the fact that we've had what's going to probably be 6 months of learning loss, you know, how are they planning to address that? Are they going to extend classes during, instead of having vacation, kids are going to go to school through? I want to understand the plan, how we're going to close that gap, and how are they preparing for that financially to address those needs. And then this is very specific to food access, and I'm not sure if this falls within their realm, but I'm very curious about the contracts and how they decide who are going to be the food vendors for schools and what opportunities exist to break up those contracts so smaller vendors can actually serve schools maybe regionally. I'm just wondering, what are they thinking about in terms of food access and whether or not that's a different department, but BPS does have a role in that, and I'd like to see what their plan is to support minority businesses in terms of the food service industry. That would be helpful to know. I don't know, you tell me if that falls within their jurisdiction.
Yeah, so it won't be this upcoming hearing, but in the BPS hearing we're having on May 26th, food and nutrition services is one of our topics. So we'll put that question in this set and forward it to that hearing. But definitely, I mean, BPS is responsible for the contracting of that enormous amount of meals. It's not a different department, so it's an appropriate thing to ask them about.
And I see that through the workforce development and HR lens too, you know, in terms of cultural outreach and competency. Also curious about, in terms of workforce development, which is one of the buckets that we're talking about today. I mentioned earlier around retention, recruitment and retention. I'm also curious as to what efforts are being made to, with paras. Specifically, there are a lot of parents who were educators in their homeland, but when they come here, they may not have the credentials. So how is BPS tapping into parents as potential paras, if that's part of their recruitment strategy? And I'm wondering whether or not they're allocating some resources to explore that model where they are engaging parents in that process. That would be helpful to know. And I'm not one to hold people hostage, so I feel like I don't have any more questions for now.
Great, thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Breeden, any further questions?
I just had some concerns about the Horace Mann School for the Deaf situation. About 40% of the students that attend there are out of district, so that generates some income coming in to that school. I really feel that we need a robust plan to manage their transition. They're working if they were in school right now, they'd be working at very the location, the accommodations are far from adequate, but I really feel that we need to dig deeper and really push to have a good, robust plan for planning for a new school, but also ensuring in the meantime that those students get all the supports and those families get all the supports that they need going forward in this transition time. And the same probably applies to Jackson Man, because they have a high number of students with autism. And again, we don't want to disperse that school community because there's so many, there's a certain synergy between the staff, the students, and the broader community that supports and helps success. So I really feel that, again, to plan a robust plan for that transition at Jackson Man. And let me see what else. I think that's about it for right now. Everybody's asked some great questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Breeden. Since we come to the end of a third round of questions, I'd ask any colleagues who want to ask a follow-up of any kind to raise their hand, either virtually or on the video screen now, and because otherwise I'm going to end this working session. All right. Seeing none, thank you all for joining us. I'm now going to gavel this working session of the Committee on Ways and Means to a close, and we will see you all tomorrow to do a similar thing for a set of departments. So thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Working session is now adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.